So really, if you do this, it will save you so much time this summer, this coming school year, every time you get on Instagram, in life generally. It's like magic. Well, hey, and welcome back to The Commonplace. My name is Autumn, and I am here today to tell you the number one thing homeschool moms need to do this summer. What do you think it is? If you've been around The Commonplace for a wee bit, you know probably what I'm gonna say, but if you're new, I'm glad you're here. I think that the most important thing that any homeschool mom needs to do this summer is get her philosophy in place. I feel like I really don't even need to say it anymore because this is my thing. However, it's summer. There is a lot coming down the pipeline for the homeschool mom if you are on the internet at all. New curriculums rolling out, new hand manipulatives are rolling out. That new thing that girl you've never met is doing, and it looks pretty on Instagram. There's so much coming down the line that already you can be experiencing FOMO, that overwhelm about what do I pick, and if I mess up, what will happen? The growing fear that homeschooling is going to cost you $1 million because you need to buy all these things. There really is this very emotional undercurrent to homeschooling when women actually don't have their philosophy in place. And even if you feel like, oh, I totally know my philosophy, it's still a good time to brush up this summer before you start your school year because your philosophy answers the why to your homeschooling, to your methods, to your curriculum picks, to the way you order your days, the schedule, the timetables, all of it. It is all supported by a philosophy. And if you've never thought about it, or if you've thought about it a little bit, or hey, you know what, haven't really touched it since last year, the number one thing you can do this summer is make sure that you get that philosophy in place. And I am here today to give you a couple of guiding principle questions to help you do that, because I actually truly believe that it is the thing that will help you the most throughout the entire school year. Okay, so if you don't know, philosophy is the love of wisdom. Historically, classically, that's how it's been understood. It has not been a thing that if you picture a bunch of old guys in libraries surrounded by their books all day who never come outside and never see the sun, that's not doing philosophy. Could be doing modern philosophy, which is a headache. However, philosophy, love of wisdom is insanely practical because like I said, it undergirds everything that you do. You have a why for these things. In a recent podcast episode, which I'll link above for you, we worked through Aristotle's 4 causes. And this is a very helpful framework to ask just 4 questions about anything, what something is or how it changes into something else. And when we think about educating our children, we are actually starting with persons, which if you're a Masonite, you know, children are born persons, but hey, they're immature. They're also uneducated. And so the thing we're doing, the change that's happening is that we want them to become educated, mature persons. But then there are all these questions to that, like how does that happen? Can you just decide the path you want to take from A to B based on your preferences, your whims, your scheduling this year, or are there actual rules to this? And so what I explored in that episode and what we'll kind of touch on a little bit in here is that God gives answers to those 4 questions. And so while often I hear the question of, well, the Bible doesn't really say anything about how I school, right? It doesn't say I have to go to classical school or private school or Christian school or public school, so I can just pick. I think there's a better question there. And that question is, did God design a philosophy of education? And if you listen to that episode or if you hang around here, I'm gonna say yes, for sure he did. So you can start with these 3 questions that I think are really helpful and you can use them to assess any curriculum option that you're looking at for this fall. The first is, what is a person? How does God define a person? Well, we know we have body, mind, and soul. We know that they're indivisible, that we need to be fed certain things for each one of those categories in order for virtue to blossom and grow. And then you look at your curriculum, you say, what is a person? What do they think a person is? Is it a child with an empty bucket for a mind? Is it a child who is a machine to be programmed? Or is it a child made in the image of God who needs to be treated in a particular way? Of course, there are more options for answers in the modern world, but already you can see how a lot of educational philosophies just fell off into the pit where they should stay. Then my second favorite question to ask is, how are they formed? How is a person formed? What does God say changes us? What are we allowed to use? If you're big in the Mason world, you know that we are not allowed to manipulate a child. You cannot use fear, influence, suggestion, love, any of these things in a way that manipulates the will of a child, because ultimately you're cutting them off at the knees. And so when you think about formation and you think about curriculum options, do you have the option to choose something other than, say, a living book? Can you use textbooks? Can you use worksheets? Can you use hand manipulatives? Can you use things? Can you use out of doors? All of these things will either fit in with how a person is formed according to God or not. And there's a sneaky thing in here that loops into question 3, which is to what end ought we aim? Every education has an answer to what is the point of this? Where are we trying to get to? God, of course, would say the end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, right? To be in relationship with him. But presently, while we're here, it's also to be in right relationship with the things he's made. With God, with man, with the universe. What does that look like? What does a life of virtue look like? What does it look to cultivate wisdom? These are all questions you have to ask, because whatever your answer is for this is the end of education will determine how you're going to get there. If this is where you want to end up, over here with, say, I don't know, virtue and wisdom, or if this is where you want to end up with job skills, you're going to take 2 very different paths in terms of the materials you use, the way you structure your school day, the curriculum options, the books, the types of teachers you will use, the assessment. All sorts of things will change depending on your answer to what is the end of education, which we are continuing to talk about on the podcast. I'm going to keep dropping the podcast because I love classical education and we're digging into all the different parts of it this season, and so I want you to come and join. But you really do have to ask, what does this curriculum say is the point of education? Do they believe that my child has, back to that first question, an immaterial part? Or are they just a bunch of atoms that can be programmed like a computer? Am I trying to get a competent worker at the end of this who can maintain a 40-hour-a-week job based on an old factory model? Or am I trying to develop an entire person, mind, body, spirit? Do I think that I can do that? Do I actually believe that someone can learn to have good character by the way they're educated? Or do I think that's something separate, something just for church? These questions will actually help you find your anchoring philosophy. And then it's truly the best gift you give yourself when you go into the school year, whether that be day to day, how you're going to order your day, or again, like you're buying your curriculum or you're changing out your books, because otherwise it can feel like you don't know if you're really moving in the right direction. Because homeschooling is an interesting thing in that we do it often, mainly alone. Even if you have a co-op once a week, you're mainly alone in your home. We don't assess the same way. We pop into the state standardized test every so often, but ultimately we are looking at our child and asking ourselves, am I doing this right? So then you want to know, is your philosophy rooted in a new educational idea that just popped up in the last 20 years? Is it 2,000 years old? Is it 500 years old? Who was the founder of this? What did they believe about children? How did they move in God's world? What did they think was important? What did they think we should aim for as the purpose of living? How did they define happiness? There are a lot of questions here that you would think, oh, that goes into choosing my curriculum. It certainly does. This is your philosophy. And this is the most important thing you could do this summer. I feel like this video doesn't seem like it's one of my norms. Like, it's not like a lot of helpful stuff, like read these books or here's how Mason would apply this. But it's just coming out of the fact that I talk to a lot of moms now about choosing curriculum, whether they want to go with something like mine, the CMEC, which I love, or if they're going to choose something totally different, or if they think they can mix Charlotte Mason and unschooling and cyber schooling, all these different things, because we have a lot of options in the modern world, seemingly, of ways to educate our children. And I keep coming back to over and over again, you have to have your philosophy. It actually doesn't help you if you just like this mom's pictures on Instagram, or you just found these Pinterest things and you thought, oh, I could do that, I could probably handle that, or you thought this just makes my life easier, so I'll just pick this one. None of those are the right questions. The questions are, what is a person, how are we formed, and to what end ought we aim? And then you make sure that your answers to that match God's answers to that, and also match your curriculum's answers to that. Otherwise, you're just going to feel like you're lost at sea. If the philosophy isn't rooted in hopefully eternal principles, eternal truths, in the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty, if they're not that, then you'll either be left to sea because you'll keep hopping around, you'll feel dissatisfied, you'll see either the mind, body, or spirit of your child wasting away. You'll get caught up in the affiliate link world of homeschooling, where you feel like you have to buy everything you see. Every new thing that comes out every single month is a threat to the thing you've already picked. You just don't have firm footing. And so I will, until the end of time, say that the most important thing for a mom to do is to get her philosophy in place. And I think you have time to do that this summer. Now, I am going to be talking about some starting books for that. I do already have a video about books that show the difference in classical education, and I think that one would help. If you get in there, you'll start understanding your bearings a little bit better. And I've also been linking the podcast, obviously, but there's a lot of reading that you could do this summer. I mean, you could listen through season 2 of my podcast in about 4 hours, which is all of Charlotte Mason's 20 principles. Like, that's a philosophy starter course. And then even right now, we're still talking about that within Common House. So we're always talking about philosophy because, again, nothing practical exists without an underlying philosophy. And I refuse not to acknowledge the philosophies underneath because they are the things that shape our lives. They're the things that we pursue. They're the things that we fundamentally chase sometimes without even knowing it. So the number one thing you can do this summer really, truly is to be a student of your own philosophy and make sure that you know the course forward so that you can have a really awesome year. I'll see you guys soon.